to Divorce Well in Florida, What to Know Before Your Spouse Does. My name is Matthew Waring, and I'm here with Brian Dunmire, and we're both partners at the Florida divorce law firm of Fairway Law Group. And today we have another episode. We're talking about, I think we're going to talk about why people get divorced. And it's a very general topic. I think that we're going to kind of speak in a lot of generalities today, but it's important to understand why people get divorced and to understand whether or not in your own life, if it's something you're considering, it might help you kind of identify what might be going on, what might be leading to the situation in your marriage, and if a divorce is right for you.
Yeah, and Matt, why don't we start off with a real hard topic? Do you think that it would be reasonable for somebody to want to get a divorce if their wife slept with their brother?
That would be a very reasonable reason to get divorced. Yep.
That one doesn't come as much of a shock, huh?
No. That's pretty easy. Certainly infidelity, affairs, they're very hard things to overcome. People are racing to the courthouse to file their divorce case after they find out that a partner's been cheating. I get it. You know, it's the whole lack of trust. You don't want to live with this person anymore if they've cheated on you. I get it, but you'd be surprised. I think you and I both know this. Affairs are not even in the top 5 or 6 reasons why people are getting divorced most often.
Yeah, that's definitely consistent. I mean, you hear about the affair every now and then, or you get the phone call from the wife or the husband. Hey, I just found out that my spouse has been cheating on me and I want to go ahead and file for a divorce. And it happens. It certainly happens, but that's definitely not the number one, phone call that we get, or it's not the most common one. And a lot of times we get a phone call and it's, hey, I want to get a divorce. And it's not until 5, 10, 15 minutes, the second phone call, maybe even, oh yeah. And I found out 2 or 3 years ago, they cheated on me with some girl at work or whatever. Definitely not. And I wanted to bring up the topic of sleeping with a best friend or a sibling because it makes a little bit of lightheartedness out of a difficult situation. But that's definitely not the rule. It's the exception. I'll say what I see most often leading to divorces, and Matt, you and I have talked about this, are one of 3 things, if you want to group alcoholism and drug use together. But substance abuse and mental health issues. And the mental health issues are kind of the interesting one because, we recommend our clients, a lot of clients, hey, maybe you should go get some therapy. On substance abuse, it's just shocking how many divorces come from alcoholism, illegal drug use, lots of, hey, my husband hurt his knee and he started taking painkillers and, it's gone down the whole opioid dependency and now he's not really working. And it doesn't seem to be a real clear-cut thing. It seems that it just kind of builds over time where, hey, my wife was a phenomenal partner and then she started drinking, and at some point over the last 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, she ended up getting a couple of DUIs, and she goes out and I haven't seen her, or and then you always can kind of get into the, God forbid, the nasty stuff, which is the domestic violence or even worse, child abuse, things like that. I mean, is that kind of what you're seeing too, Matt, or what you think?
I mean, yeah, I think definitely, absolutely. The number 1 and number 2 are actually both tied for number 1. The reason why people are getting divorced is going to be substance abuse and mental health issues. I mean, there's just no question about it. You have people that they get married and, they might have been abusing alcohol or using illegal substances, drugs, maybe when they were dating, when they got married, and everybody was cool with it at that time. But flash forward 10 years and you've got a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old at home, and it's just not cool anymore. So, and then there's all the other attendant circumstances that go along with mental health and substance abuse, which is, you're not as good of a parent as you could be, or your spouse is not as good of a parent. They fly off the handle. They have anger management problems. they're so wrapped up in their own issues and their own problems that they can't be a very good partner in the relationship. They're just constantly obsessed with their emotions and their feelings. It's not just substance abuse, it's mental health as well. You're so focused inward. All of your thought process is on how you're feeling. It's your head, how your well-being, your emotional state. You have nothing to give to anybody else. So you get detached from your partner, you're detached from your children, and then that just starts to create distance. And then that distance is what leads to an affair or a divorce. So a lot of times affairs are kind of the tip of the iceberg. What's really going on under the water, so to speak, is going to be something mental health related or substance abuse related, far and away. There are other reasons why people get divorced, but if you want to know the number one reason why, mental health and substance abuse.
Yeah, and the substance abuse is always a really interesting one, because one thing about substance abuse is, we're not talking about the guy who has a couple of drinks at the end of the night, or the lady who has a couple of glasses of wine. If you haven't dealt with alcoholism or addicts in your life or had any association, one of the first things that you realize when you're dealing with an addict is part of the whole addiction personality is manipulation. Okay. But a lot of times they can carry a stable job and they can make you laugh and they can manipulate you. Being married to somebody is no different. Maybe your husband is an alcoholic and it's taken you a year to realize that he's an alcoholic and that he's been manipulating you for a year. Oh, honey, that was the guy's weekend. Well, when the guy's weekend is every single weekend, and he's coming home and he's blackout drunk at 2 p.m. and he's neglecting your needs as a spouse, but more importantly, the needs of the kids, that's when there might be a problem. And of course, we're divorce attorneys. Our specialty is getting people divorced and doing it with dignity and making it as easy as possible and knowing when to fight. When it's time to fight, Matt and I will fight for you or our clients, and also knowing what not to fight about. But if you're dealing with alcoholism or a spouse that's alcoholic, don't be afraid to turn to a mental health professional to go get some counseling. And one thing that I've noticed over the years, both in my personal life and as a attorney, is you're not going to change somebody who's an alcoholic, and it ain't going to work out well for you if you think you're going to. It's not until they hit that rock bottom, it's not until they realize that the decisions that they've made aren't correct and that they're not doing anything, and to accept that this person who you loved, who maybe you had 5 just phenomenal years with, you went on these trips and you had a wonderful, beautiful marriage, and you've gotten to know their family, and maybe you're in the minority of people in the world who get along with their in-laws. You love their family and everything, and it can be a tough pill to swallow, to accept that their alcoholism or their drug use isn't getting better, and and when you make the decision to get a divorce, it's going to be tough on them, and I'll say this, and I'll turn it over to Matt, to you for your thoughts. There's always that also added complexity to it, where when you love and you care about somebody and they are an alcoholic or they are addicted to drugs, but you've made the decision that you want to break up with them or essentially get a divorce if you're married, there's always that added complexity of, well, what are they going to do? I mean, are they going to go on a bender? Are they going to overdose and die? And that's a real concern. I mean, Matt, do you have any thoughts on that, or have you seen anything or any experiences with that?
I mean, yeah, but you always got to think about yourself first and the kids, and you can't really worry about what somebody else is going to do. You can't control somebody else. That's number one. And that's going to lead to probably the second thing we talk about, control. But you cannot control someone else's actions, and you should stop trying to. And you should stop wasting your energy in trying to control somebody with substance abuse problems or mental health issues. You should just stop trying to control them and get the distance that you need in your life to live a better quality of life through a divorce. And you can't worry about how somebody's going to react to a divorce or what they're going to do or what the consequences are going to be to them. You can't control them in the marriage. You definitely cannot control them after the marriage. So that shouldn't really be a concern, in my opinion. You know, people get married for a variety of reasons. It's not always just love. Everybody knows that. It's common sense. There's a lot of reasons to get married. You know, some people get married for financial reasons. Some people get married for stability reasons. Some people get married because they think it's the right thing to do. Some people get married because they can't stand to be alone. They need a partner. Housing's expensive. You've been living together for 2 years, rent an apartment. It makes sense. There's a lot of reasons to get married. And so even if you're dealing with somebody, if you have a spouse that has substance abuse or mental health issues, there's a lot of people, depending on what benefits you're getting out of the marriage, that are willing to stay committed to that relationship. So just because somebody has a substance abuse problem or mental health issues does not mean that you should divorce them. It does not mean that you're going to have to get a divorce or that a divorce is in your future. We're just saying that in the majority of people, in the majority of divorces, it seems that if there was one common denominator, it's going to be substance abuse and mental health issues. Somebody is just out of control. One person or both have just lost control of their lives, and they're no longer providing enough benefits to the marriage, to the other partner, for that partner to overlook what they have to deal with. And, you know, that I think would go to another very, very strong reason. It's a little bit of an academic argument, but it's one of the reasons I think most people get divorced. And it's a value. You get imbalanced. You get imbalanced as far in terms of value, where you have one person's value begins to, during a marriage, if one person's value or perceived value begins to increase and the other person stagnates or even decreases, and then you start getting this gulf in between each person's relative value, then a divorce is almost certain. You know, for example, you know, if two people get married and one person does a really good job taking care of themselves, they work out, they stay in shape, you know, they do all the things to try to look good as they age. They stay out of the sun, they wear sunscreen, they stay hydrated, they take vitamins, they go to the doctor.
Botox.
They get Botox, yeah.
It is Florida, we're a Florida firm, yeah.
Whatever it takes, they work on themselves and they increase their value, or at least try to hold on to their value throughout the marriage. But then you have another spouse who, you know, they don't take care of themselves. And that could be substance abuse. It might not be. You know, they might just not take care of themselves. They might overeat. They might not work out. They might not go to the doctor. Personal hygiene is not, you know, they don't work on personal hygiene. They're just kind of getting left behind. Then what's going to happen is you're going to have one spouse that is making an effort to try to increase their value, and you have another spouse that is not making any effort and their value is decreasing. And when you have that mismatch in values, then, you know, you're heading down the divorce pipeline. And again, like I said earlier, you can't control the other person. You can't. So, you know, you just have to take care of yourself, take care of your kids, do the best that you can. But if your partner is not taking care of themselves, you know, it's only a matter of time that you know, it's only so long you're going to be able to put up with that.
Yeah. And naturally, one of the questions that we get all the time as an attorney, or things that we hear all the time as attorneys, is, well, my partner's a deadbeat alcoholic. Well, you know, my partner didn't contribute anything to the marriage, you know, emotionally, because he was out doing drugs or drinking or anything like that. I've got my thoughts on this one way or the other. If there's kids involved, yeah, it's going to come into play if your spouse is an alcoholic or is abusing drugs or whatever, because there's kids, and the court is going to make a determination ultimately what's in the best interest of the child as it relates to time sharing. And if somebody's a deadbeat alcoholic and is getting DUIs, the court's not going to allow them to be driving with the kids. The court's not going to allow them to have primary time sharing. We don't like the word custody in the state of Florida. We like the word time sharing. For those listening, that's why we try and use time sharing. Every now and then attorneys will use the word custody, but we try and use time sharing. But if you're just Joe and Sally and you're married and Sally has a drinking problem and you don't have any kids or anything along those lines, there's one little caveat to that, which is if there is, when it comes down to an intentional dissipation of marital assets, okay, and that's a kind of fancy legal phrase, if Sally's an alcoholic and she's spending thousands of dollars a month drinking because she's going out, she's going to these expensive steakhouses, she goes to Las Vegas and she's drinking and gambling and things of that nature, then it becomes an issue because you can show that she's intentionally dissipating marital assets. However, if it's just her drinking and she gets really drunk and she's gotten really drunk for a year or two and you're a husband and you just don't want to put up with it, so you want to file it for a divorce, maybe you're even a little bit apprehensive to file a divorce because even though your spouse is an alcoholic and you want to get a divorce, you don't want to drag your spouse through the mud. You just want the divorce and you want to go on. Florida courts don't care about that. Florida courts just want to, easiest way to put it, add up assets on the left, liabilities on the right, subtract liabilities from assets. Hopefully it's a positive number, divide it in half, grant you your divorce, and go on. Florida's not going to get into the fine-tuned details as to how much wine did Sally have or how many beers did John have on a weekend or whatnot. Now, if there's kids involved, it's completely different because we want to do what's in the best interest of the children. So we want to make sure that the kids aren't essentially being cared for by an alcoholic who can't take care of the children. So that's a completely separate area. But when it comes to just a normal divorce with no kids, they're just dividing up assets. So that's that. What about money, Matt? How many divorces do you see that relate to money or because people fall into tough finances or whatnot?
It's really interesting. We see this new emergence of this thing called silver divorce, which is there's a huge boom in divorces with people in their 60s. People that are retiring and then getting divorced. We see a lot of it. There's a lot of these cases being filed all over the state. It's a new trend, and a lot of it has to do with money. You might have somebody that's sticking around with their partner for 20, 30 years while they have a great career, but the minute and they save all this money and they have a nice lifestyle, but then the minute that that spouse with the amazing career retires and now they're just living off of Social Security and savings, well, now there's no reason to stay married to them anymore. Because now you just get a divorce, you get half the savings accounts, you get to claim Social Security on the spouse that you were married to, so now you're both making about the same amount of income. And so you can ride that spouse, so to speak, the point at which they retire, and then you get retired and you file a divorce, you take half of their savings and you file Social Security under them, and now you're making good Social Security and you got, several $1 million to your name because the marital estate's been split up, the marital home's been sold, and you go on your way. So we're seeing that a lot. It seems like retirement is the great equalizer. People are getting retired and then they're getting divorced. And that is absolutely financial. I don't necessarily think that it doesn't mean that they're getting divorced due to finances, but I think a lot of people stay together for financial reasons and then get divorced when the financial reasons for staying married no longer exist. We see that a lot too. And so we see that a lot. And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about value is, when people are getting married, I hate to take the love out of it, but when people are getting married, it's a value acquisition. It's a business deal. It's a merger. And just like two businesses that are merging together, one business has customers, the other business has the product, or, they merge and it creates a good deal. However, when one of those parties to the deal no longer brings anything to the table, the deal no longer makes sense. And that's what happens a lot with marriage. Over time, somebody's just not producing as much value for the marriage as they used to, or they fall short of what the other spouse's expectations were for the marriage and fizzles out, and they want a divorce because they think they could do better on their own, or they want another shot to try and go find somebody who can add the value to their life that they're looking for.
Yeah, that's absolutely one. And then the other thing that I see, and this actually goes directly to the values, is if I've heard it once, I've heard it 100 times. From the wife, it'll be, hey, my husband just isn't really helping out with the kids. I don't feel like he's invested. When he gets home, he just kind of sits on his cell phone, whether it's scrolling Instagram or reading the news or whatever. So that's from the wife's perspective. From the husband's perspective, it's, I bust my ass 50 hours a week in order to try and make money to pay the bills, and then I come home and my wife's nagging me because the dishes aren't clean, or but I'm so tired because I was just closing some big deal, or maybe working outside with my hands or something along those lines. And it's interesting because what I do notice is that in those types of scenarios, sometimes that kind of goes to the value system that Matt was just talking about. And that's something where there's a simple breakdown in communication. And that's why a lot of times before you jump to a divorce, it might just be worth trying to get some marriage counseling or couples therapy or individual therapy or something along those lines, because something like that you might be able to work out and come to some mutual agreement for, and ultimately in the long run save your marriage, which, even though we're divorce attorneys and Matt and I will get you divorced, within a blink of an eye if that's what you want, obviously it's not the right decision for everybody. If you can salvage a marriage, you're going to want to try and salvage a marriage if that's what you want. Before you call a divorce attorney, you might just want to call a therapist and just kind of run it by them to see if there's anything for any tweaks that could be made, things of that nature.
Yeah. Another good indication or another reason why people often get divorced is because no matter what age they are, they still feel like they have vitality. They still want to have an active sex life, and they can't get that anymore with their partner. And that begins to eat away at them. At first they might be angry that their partner refuses sex or is not interested in sex, and then that anger kind of turns into frustration, and that kind of, they bottle that up, and that just kind of festers for a while, and they get to the point where they just can't even stand to look at their spouse anymore. It happens outside of marriage, but if you want to know two things that go hand in hand, it's marriage and sex. You really can't have marriage without sex. I mean, you can. There's certain situations. That doesn't mean that you can't be married or you can't be in love with somebody, but the general rule is that if you're going to be married, you're going to be having sex. And if you're not having sex, there's a problem with the marriage, or there's a problem with you, or there's a problem with your spouse that needs to be worked on. But that goes back to mental health. If there's some reason why you're not able to have sex, or you're not interested in sex, and there could be something wrong with you medically or mentally, something needs to get checked out. But yeah, that's one of a very large reason why marriages end in divorce. But again, it goes back to the differences in values. One person, values sex more than the other. You got a mismatch in values. It's going to create a lot of tension in the marriage. And then that could also lead to an affair. That could lead to substance abuse. You could have somebody that's so frustrated in their marriage that their spouse never wants to have sex that they start drinking all the time. That certainly happens. So you've got situations there. But certainly, like what Brian said, communication is definitely key. Communication can certainly help out. Marriage therapy certainly helps out. Marriage therapy can help out a lot of people because they come in and it's like a referee, and they can kind of open each spouse's eyes to the other spouse's perspective, so that you're not just in one of these arguments where you're seeing black and she's seeing white, and you just can't reach a middle ground. Marriage therapy can kind of sit outside the situation, look at situations objectively, but it's not the cure-all, and it doesn't mean that getting therapy is not necessarily going to save your marriage. So there are a lot of people that get therapy and then still get divorced. But it is a good thing to try if you can afford it.
I think that one of the interesting things that I've learned as a divorce attorney is that a large percentage of our job is giving just real practical advice to people. And what is shocking to me from time to time is when I get the phone calls or the client consults, or I hear from friends or something, hey, I think that I might want to get a divorce. Go, okay, well, you want to talk about it? Yeah, this is what's going on. And it is the just most egregious set of facts that you can possibly think of. Hey, my husband verbally abuses me. He doesn't give me any money. He comes home late. He goes out every single weekend. When he does talk to me, he cusses at me. The most egregious set of facts. And I go, okay, yeah, let's get you divorced. I don't know. I don't think I'm ready to get divorced yet. And it's just crazy because sometimes you hear these stories where you're thinking to yourself, because we're attorneys, but we're also humans, right? And I'm thinking to myself, this person should have been divorced a year ago. And then the opposite, the natural progression of that is, if you should be getting a divorce because you and your spouse just aren't getting along, the whole theory is that after you get a divorce, your life is going to be much better. Okay. And it's sometimes there's a lot of frustrating parts about our jobs, but one of the most frustrating is when I hear somebody's story and I just think, you should have gotten a divorce yesterday. And then they go, I just don't think I'm ready to get a divorce yet. Or, I don't really want to do it. He said that he's going to go talk to a therapist and try and change. And it's just like, he's not going to change. I can tell you that. And then sure enough, we get a phone call 6 months later, to retain us or whatever. And that's fine. Everybody's got to make their own decisions for themselves. There's no question about that. But the whole reason for divorce is to think long-term here. If you're just really not getting along with your spouse and things aren't getting better and you can't see them and you kind of meshing and creating that wonderful life, that it might be ready for you to get a divorce. And one thing that I tell my clients, usually specifically as it relates to kids, but this is also true just on a personal level, is quit thinking short term, start thinking long term. Okay. So if you have a kid and you're going through a divorce and you're fighting with your spouse over a pickup time, or is the pickup going to be at the mall or at the Publix, okay, which are a quarter mile apart from each other, and both of you all have reliable mode of transportation, it's a terrible way to start. You've got a kid that's 2, 3, 4 years. You're going to be dealing with that spouse until they're 18, okay? So use that concept of short-term and long-term thinking with why it is you want to get a divorce or why you're considering getting a divorce. If you're relatively young, you don't have any kids, maybe you don't even own a house, a divorce is a relatively simple process that you file some paperwork with the court, you get a bunch of mandatory disclosure. It's a little bit complex in the sense of you got to check a bunch of boxes, you got to cross a lot of T's, you got to dot a lot of I's. It's got to be done correctly, and that's why you always want to get an attorney if you can afford one. But it can be done pretty quickly, and then you can get divorced and move on with your life. And think about that in a year, 2 years, 5 years down the line, how much happier you will be, no matter how ominous or big of a mountain it looks like to go through the court system and get a divorce. So Matt and I aren't really in the business of encouraging people to rush to the courthouse and get divorces or pushing them to get a divorce. That's something that only the client or the potential client can decide. Hey, yes, I am ready to get a divorce. But when you're ready to get a divorce, just know, we're going to be right there holding your hand, walking you through it, and making it as easy as possible.
Yeah, divorce is never easy. Some are easier than others. None of them are ever easy. You're disentangling two people's lives uprooting somebody out of their home, uprooting kids, moving people around, having to go and get a job for the first time, not having money saved up, not knowing what you're going to do. Really, it's the uncertainty is what scares people most about divorce. It's just not knowing what the future is going to hold, not knowing where you're going to be living in 6 months to a year. And for people that are adults or people that have been married 10, 15, 20 years, it's a big shock. And it's a completely there's just so much risk, perceived risk involved with getting a divorce. And that's why people stay married for as long as they do, is to avoid that risk, to avoid that uncertainty. That said, half of marriages end in divorce. There are plenty of divorced people out there. People get divorced every day. Trust me. There are people that are getting divorced every single day in the state, and they are not disappearing into the ether. They're not falling off of a cliff. They're going about their lives. They're making adjustments. And, a lot of them look back and think, man, why did I wait so long? Why did I stay in that relationship for so long when now that I'm free and I'm out of this marriage and I'm looking back, yes, it was tough. Yes, it was difficult. Yes, there was risk and uncertainty, but I'm finally happy. Or at least I feel in control of my happiness. You don't have to be happy, but feeling in control of your happiness is really critical. It's better to be divorced and have to go through the steps of independence than it is to allow someone else to dictate your happiness.
Yeah, and I can actually speak anecdotally on this. When I was a baby attorney, I worked at this real shitty law firm doing foreclosure work, and I thought that it was fine. I convinced myself it was fine. Hey, this isn't that bad. I like it. It's somewhat stable. It's relatively low stress for the most part. I mean, you're just pushing paper. There's not much going for it. And I got called into an office one day, and I was part of a mass layoff, and I got fired. No severance, nothing. And, it happened to me. The thing that will never happen to you happened to me. I got laid off from a job. And I had student loans, I had an apartment, I had a car payment, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I remember I actually went to dinner at Texas Roadhouse off of Archer Road in Alachua County with my mother that night. And she treated me to dinner. That was very nice of her. She just kind of talked to me like a mom does. Hey, it's going to be okay. It's not a big deal. You'll be all right. And you fast forward, I mean, time flies, about 15 years now or so. I don't even...
Not 15.
What's that?
It's not 15.
It's coming up on maybe like 11 or 12.
Yeah.
You fast forward 11 or 12 years, and I'm not going to say it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me, but I look back, I laugh about it. I think what would have happened if I just would have stayed there, if they wouldn't have fired me, if they wouldn't have laid me off, what would have happened? And I don't know. I mean, maybe my life would be phenomenal. I don't know. But, I could play that game all day long. But I say that was a pretty low point in my life. You get laid off. It's below to your ego. You don't know how you're going to afford your bills. You don't know where you're going to live, everything along those lines. Fast forward now. I mean, life is great. I mean, I love it. I love my job. I own my own law firm now with Matt on the other side of this call. And, life is good. I've got a beautiful, wonderful wife and a beautiful 3-year-old son and another one on the way. And, I look back at that time and I almost start laughing because now I remember how shitty that job was and how much I didn't like it and how terrible they treated me and everything. But when I was in it, I was, trying to convince myself that it wasn't that bad, and I got my paycheck and everything. And marriage is no different. Getting a divorce is no different. It certainly is much more emotional, and I don't want to compare somebody who's been married for 20 years and devoted their life to a marriage as the same as me getting fired from a shitty law firm job. But the life lesson is definitely somewhat similar in that we always make out in life that something's gonna be so much worse than it actually is, or oh, I'll never be able to do that, or I can't even think about doing that. And then you do whatever it is you're trying to do, whether it's, if I just said, hey, you think you could go run a marathon? Most people are going to say absolutely not. But I'll tell you what, if you sat there and you trained for a year, you could probably run a marathon. So, it's all, you're getting a divorce because you want light at the end of the tunnel. And it's always nice to hear from previous clients who say, look, it was a tough time. It was a shock when my wife told me that she wanted a divorce, or it was a shock when my husband filed the divorce papers. But look, 4 years later, I'm doing great. I'm having a good time, and never been better. I just bought a house, or, I just got married again, which always kind of baffles me, but, got married again, or something along those lines. So it's not always as doom and gloom as you might think that it is, and that's just one thing, like anything. And then I'll just say this, and then I'll turn it over to Matt. There's 4 or 5 stages of grief, and if you've ever studied any sort of psychology, you've learned about it. It's not necessarily linear, so anytime that something unexpected happens, or you come to a very difficult decision in your life that isn't fun, you're going to go through those 4 or 5 stages in some varying degree, and divorce is no difference. And when we speak to clients, a lot of times I personally like to just kind of think to myself, where are they? Because if they're in the shock stage, well, then they're not going to be able to necessarily make rational decisions. I'm not saying that they're not lucid. I mean, they certainly can still make decisions, but they might say, oh yeah, I don't care, give my wife everything one day, and then the next day they say, I don't want her to have anything. Well, it hasn't really started to set in. Then you get into the bargaining stage, the anger stage. Anger stage is very difficult because when you're angry, you cannot make rational decisions. And so, just whether you're listening to this because you're going through a divorce, considering going through a divorce, you just got served by your wife with divorce papers or whatever it might be, if you're in that anger stage, do not make decisions. You got to comply with court deadlines and things of that nature, but don't make decisions because you're going to regret them. And that is actually one of the reasons why it is just so important to hire an attorney, because we try not to get emotional about the cases. And sometimes clients don't like that because they want us to get emotional about their cases. And it doesn't mean that we don't care deeply about the case and we're not fighting for you. But if we were getting as emotional about a case as the person who's going through the divorce is getting emotional, man, that would not end well. So
yeah, it reminds me of it's the exact opposite, but it's very similar to the Key and Peele skit. Key and Peele, they're like a comedian team. They had a show on Comedy Central. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of them. But they had a skit that was very good, and it was Barack Obama, and he'd be sitting in the Oval Office, and he was talking to the nation, but he was so reserved and careful in the words he selected that he had to hire an anger translator, and his anger translator was named Luther. And Luther, wore a baggy suit, and he had these, he had gold rings on every finger, and he would stand behind Barack Obama while he's sitting there, and Barack Obama would say something, very calm and reasoned, and then Luther would come out and translate exactly what he really meant, So if you've seen that episode, you know what I'm talking about. Hiring a lawyer for a divorce is the opposite. You see, the people that are getting the divorce, you're full of anger, you're full of rage, you're full of resentment, you could be completely reasonable, but there's still emotions involved, or it's your money on the line. Even if you don't care about your spouse anymore, you still care about your money, you still care about your house, you still care about your kids, and that gets you upset. The lawyers, we're like anger reducers. We take what you're saying, we kind of package that up into, more reasonable, more attractive looking packaging, and then we kind of deploy it through the court system. So it's like a reverse Luther from the Key and Peele skit, if you're familiar with it. So we initially started talking about in this episode, why do people get divorced? We talked about mental health and substance abuse, by far leading the way on what's causing people out there to get divorced in the state of Florida. We talked about the value mismatch, where you have, one spouse appreciating in value, the other spouse depreciating in value, how that's going to cause a problem in the marriage. We also talked about the reason why a lot of people get married for a lot of different reasons, and whatever the reason was for why they got married no longer exists, so they no longer feel like it's worth being married anymore, whether that be financial, physical, emotional, whatever it is. What we did was we recommend that if anybody's out there and you have any of these, if you're kind of going through any of these processes, if you're trying to analyze whether or not you're at that point in your life where you want a divorce, we recommend, first of all, that you seek some sort of counseling or therapy. We're required to say that, but some people really truly are believers in it. I'm less of a believer in it, but a lot of people believe in it. The big takeaway that I think I want anybody listening to this to have is, regardless for why you want to get divorced, you got to understand that your rationale is, in most circumstances, it is justifiable. If you want to get divorced because your wife no longer wants to have sex, that is a justifiable reason to get divorced. If you want to get divorced because your husband quit his job and he's not working anymore, he's not bringing money in the household, that is a justifiable reason to get divorced. If your partner cheated on you, that is a justifiable reason to get divorced. Whatever you're feeling out there, whatever you think that your justification might be, there is going to be a real human explanation, and they are all acceptable reasons to get divorced. But that said, if you're contemplating it, you really need to try to have a plan. That's critically important. Having a plan is important. You can't create a plan for what you're going to do to get through a divorce if you don't know what a divorce is about, what you're going to need to do to get divorced, what kind of information you're going to need to provide, and you just don't understand the law and how it works. What are you going to do with the kids? There's so many different variables. That's why it's important that if you're contemplating a divorce, start educating yourself early. And that's why we really created this podcast, what to know before your spouse does. Regardless of why you want to get divorced, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the courts why you want to get divorced. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to Brian why. What does matter, the bottom line takeaway, is start educating yourself and have a plan in place to help you through the process in case you do plan on getting a divorce. And if you're one of these people that are just, that you need to get out of a toxic relationship, that you need to get your kids away from an abusive spouse or an alcoholic spouse, whatever the case may be, knowing how the law works and having a plan is going to give you a lot more confidence, and it's going to help you get to where you're going and be more in control of your own happiness.
And when Matt says have a plan or be prepared, what he does not mean is to siphon off all of your assets and your money into a Swiss bank account. Okay, there's no winking or nodding there. All right, that's not going to end well for you. What he means is just think about what the practical reality of it is, and you're not going to solve it in one day. You're not going to solve it in a week. But where do you want to live after you get your divorce? If you have kids, you're probably not going to be moving to Georgia unless there's a really good reason for you to be moving to Georgia, or if you don't mind not seeing your kids every day. And those are the types of things that we can do as an attorney, is discuss plans with you. So if you are getting a divorce and you live in Orlando or you live in Fort Lauderdale and you want to move to Atlanta, but you've got 2 kids and they're 4 years old, we can answer your question. Hey, will I be able to move to Atlanta even though I have the kids? And our response is going to be, yeah, you can, but you're probably not going to, keep primary time sharing with the kids. They'll probably be in Florida if they're enrolled in school, if all their family lives down here. Or, to bring this completely full circle, if you're a wife and you have a really stable job and you have a phenomenal job offer in Atlanta and making 6 figures, and your husband's a deadbeat alcoholic, the answer might be, yeah, we think that you're going to be able to move to Atlanta with your kids. And I just use that as an example to say exactly what Matt was saying is make a plan. That'll allow you to make the plan, at least to have some actionable goal. One of the things that we discuss in our intakes with our clients once we sign up with them, one of the first questions we ask all the details, names, dates of birth, facts, everything like that. But it's, what are your goals? What are the 1, 2, 3 big things that you really want out of this? Do you really want the house? Do you really want primary time sharing to the kids? Do you really want to just keep your own retirement account so that and then the spouse can have everything else? Because if we know what the 1 or 2 big goals are, maybe 3 big goals are, then we can craft the litigation strategy around that in order to accomplish that. So if you are on the verge of getting a divorce, or you're contemplating it, and you are trying to figure out, what now, that would probably be what the answer is. If attorneys can't give a clear-cut answer, that would probably be what Matt and I would suggest. Is try to figure out what's important to you after the divorce. What do you really want? What, in the context of a court splitting assets and establishing a child custody or child time sharing plan, what is it that you really want to accomplish? What is your goal? Do you want 50%? Do you want 60% time sharing? Do you want the house? Do you not want the house? Whatever it might be. And convey that to your attorney and see what they have to say.
All right, well, that will wrap up this episode of Divorce Well in Florida, What to Know Before Your Spouse Does. Again, I'm Matthew Waring.
And I'm Brian Dunmire.
Yeah, we're both partners at Fairway Law Group, Florida Divorce Law Firm.